What's going on, everybody? Happy Thirsty Thursday. Welcome to another edition here of Mean Streets live on our FTN Network YouTube page, hanging out on iTunes and Spotify. We greatly appreciate you guys as well. It is here. It is finally here, week 15 of the NFL season. It means a whole lot from an NFL landscape, but also from a fantasy football perspective as well. Hopefully you guys punched a ticket into the fantasy football playoffs. If you have any starter sit questions, you can leave them there in the comment section. You can reach out at Chris Meaney. Hop on over on our YouTube page here is probably the best way, honestly. Sometimes some of the tweets get lost. I don't know. Like, I don't even have a ton of followers. I don't get a ton of questions, but sometimes I just don't see the notifications ever since Twitter turned to X. And it's a topic for another day, but you can also reach out meanstreetsftn@gmail.com. And I have seen some people ask me some questions on there, and always circling back on these videos to help you guys as well. Tomorrow's a big day. As I always say, Friday's big day. I'll be here with you guys on Friday with some picks and some props against the spread. I do have some starters sit for you players today. Of course, a friendly reminder that not only do we have a Thursday night football game tonight, we have 3 games on Saturday as well. So there's a lot of football this weekend. Saturday football is here. A couple more weeks of Thursday night football. We do have a couple picks and some props for tonight's game, but I do have some start and some sits, some guys that I feel like are in some pretty good spots. A couple of these guys are certainly obvious, and then a couple players that I think are in tougher spots. But again, you may have to start some of these players. It is, your semifinal matchup, as it, I'm playing some pretty mediocre players in some of my matchups as well. So we got to keep an eye on some of these practice reports. I think the biggest ones, as we just take a look early at just right now into the show at the week 15 schedule. Again, just it's been the year of the backup quarterbacks. We've seen almost 60 different quarterbacks, and it happens again tonight with Easton Stick, who's going to make the start for the Chargers tonight. And I don't even know. I think it's O'Connell. Honestly, like the Raiders hadn't named a quarterback, and it does sound like it's O'Connell. But yesterday, it was sounding like it was a possibility we could see Brian Hoyer or Jimmy Garoppolo under center for the Raiders. We know that Keenan Allen is not going to be here tonight, so it's a big blow for Keenan Allen owners, because he's been absolutely phenomenal all season long for you guys. But anyways, the week does start with a pretty mediocre game. We're going to dive into that one. The Raiders are 3-point favorites here, but I look over at the Houston and the Tennessee game. The Titans, that is totally flipped. The Titans are now 3.5 favorites here. We don't know the status of CJ Stroud not practicing again today. It does sound like the Texans will be without CJ Stroud. Nico Collins, not 100% at the moment. Noah Brown is also not 100% at the moment, but it does sound like he has a real possibility of playing. Collins and CJ Stroud were sidelined today, so it's not great for the Houston Texans and CJ Stroud and this offense, and the Tennessee Titans coming off a big victory. There's injuries in Green Bay. Dobbs is limited, Reed is limited, Christian Watson probably out. The status of Devon Achane is up in the air, uncertain if he's going to be able to play against the Jets. Of course, we're keeping an eye on Tyreek Hill as well. And the biggest thing I'll say, and you guys know this, if Tyreek Hill plays, you got to play Tyreek Hill. I said this to Jake the other day. I would take 50% of the snaps for Tyreek Hill as opposed to 100% of the snaps for Justin Jefferson this week, with Nick Mullins going for the Cincinnati or for the Minnesota Vikings. And I don't even think that's a hot take. Like, Tyreek Hill, the lowest receiving yard prop I've seen from all season long was against the Jets. And I know they've been very, very stingy against quarterbacks and wide receivers, allowed the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. But he had topped that 73.5 receiving yard prop in the opening drive against the Jets a couple weeks ago. It's just, 1 or 2 catches, he could get 70 to 85 yards in the score. You're just playing him, and you just hope that he is good to go. And if you have a bye this week, thanks to Tyreek Hill, you hope that he kind of sits, don't you? You hope he sits and he gets right for week 16 of the NFL season. But some injuries across the board all over the place in New Orleans again. A few guys there. We could see Taysom Hill back this week. Chris Olave has been sidelined due to an illness. He probably plays. Isaiah Pacheco, I wouldn't count on Pacheco this week for the Kansas City Chiefs. That number has moved just a little bit as well. There's a ton of injuries across the board. Got to keep an eye on certain things here. And Seattle, we won't know really about Geno Smith. Hopefully we hear something tomorrow about Geno Smith on the Friday. That is a Monday Night Football game. Pete Carroll said yesterday, quote, "We'll see," regarding Smith's chances to return to action Monday against the Eagles. And the quote from Brady Henderson of ESPN: "These couple of days right here are just so invaluable for him, getting all the treatment he needs to get, and just the rest time for Geno Smith, of course." A big difference in the offense if Geno Smith is under center as opposed to Drew Lock under center as well. But DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, even JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba in deeper formats, a pretty good matchup for them, right? Because the Eagles are certainly struggling defensively. They can't make a tackle. Maybe the extra day's rest will help them a little bit. So we got some start and sits. We'll answer some questions that you guys have as well. CJ, no, come back. I know we really want CJ to come back. I'd love to see the Texans make the playoffs as well. Fun little story for Houston. It's completely wide open. I don't know if the playoff, you guys are all already well aware of some of the playoff scenarios, and I don't even know offhand if this is updated after the Monday Night Football game, but we have a ton of teams inside the NFC. So the Packers are 6-7 as well. The Packers at 6-7, the Rams at 6-7, the Seahawks, the Falcons, the Saints at 6-7. Of course, you have the Buccaneers at 6-7 as well. So a ton of 6-7 squads. You know, this is the first time in 3 or 4 years as we head into Week 15 where there's only 2 teams eliminated from the playoff picture: New England Patriots and the Carolina Panthers. Even the New York Giants and the DeVito story. I mean, my goodness, it's been fun, but they're still alive in the playoff picture as well. We don't expect them to make it, but there's a ton of 6-7 squads here, with the Lions and the Eagles kind of sputtering at the moment, trending in the wrong direction. We'll see if they can get right this week. The Lions have a home matchup against the scorching hot Denver Broncos, who are 6-1 since week 7. They've been really, really good. I had some numbers here on the Denver Broncos. I'm going to dive into this game a little bit deeper tomorrow, but I did lock in Denver at +5. I think the Lions will win the game. I did pick them in our FTN, straight up pool. All the picks are tweeted, on usually Thursday afternoon over at ftnfantasy.com. But I go over all my picks with you guys. But since week 7, it's worth noting the Broncos are 6-1, +11 in the turnover differential game, only allowing 15 points per game. And since the same time span, week 7, the Detroit Lions are allowing 28 points per game, nearly double of the Broncos. -8 in the turnover differential game. And Jared Goff, 12 turnovers since week 7, 7 picks. So it's 2 teams trending in different directions. They have a matchup this week in Detroit. One team not being able to take care of the football, the other creating some turnovers, and the defense playing pretty good. The Ravens there at 10-3. Of course, the Dolphins at 9-4 now with that loss to the Titans on Monday Night Football. And we have the Chiefs there, the Jaguars and the Browns all at 8-5, and a couple teams that I don't really believe in the Steelers and the Colts at 7-6, and the Texans in a tough spot with the injury. The Bills are very much alive in this thing, as we talked about on Monday, with the big win against Kansas City. A tough matchup this week against Dallas, but they've been really good at home. Buffalo this is, and the Cowboys are 500 on the road. And remember, they did lose earlier in the year in Arizona against the Cardinals. So kind of night and day with both teams. Buffalo, much better at home, scoring some points. Dallas, much better at home, scoring a lot of points. And the numbers do come down just a touch offensively for the Cowboys away from Big D. But a lot of 7-6 squads here. The Bengals at 7-6. Jake Browning's giving them an opportunity to still be alive in this thing, and the Broncos and the Bills there as well. But let's get after tonight. 2 teams that are not going to make the playoffs. We know this. The Chargers and the Raiders, and a lot has happened here over the past couple of weeks. As I mentioned, Easton Stick, and what a great name, by the way, Easton Stick. Are you kidding me? This is a big Easton Stick guy in terms of hockey sticks. I used to play with an Easton Stick back in the day. The little one pieces, the shiny blue, the gold, the Gretzky silver. I was a big fan of those Easton Sticks when I was a kid. But we're gonna see the kid Easton start here tonight in place of Justin Herbert, who is his season is lost. He's been placed on IR with the fracture finger, and it's just been so many quarterback injuries. And Herbert's had a couple. I think he fractured, or I don't know if it was officially a fracture, but he also hurt his finger. On the other hand, I think it was a couple weeks ago. I believe it was the other hand. But some injuries across the board. As I mentioned, Keenan Allen as well. who is sidelined in this football game. So the total's at 34.5. The Raiders are checking in as 3-point favorites. They're minus 167 on the money line. It doesn't sound like Josh Jacobs is going to play tonight either. So he's not officially ruled out of this game. But man, what a big blow as we open up the quarterfinals in fantasy football world. No Keenan Allen, no Justin Herbert, no Josh Jacobs. Devontae Adams is questionable. Sounds like he's going to play due to an illness, but the quarterback play has been just brutal for him. Austin Eckler has not returned value. We've seen a little bit of Isaiah Spiller last week as well. If you want to back the Raiders, the best number I'm seeing is minus 164 at Caesars. It's really tough to lay that kind of juice on a team like the Las Vegas Raiders, but I do like them tonight to win the football game. I like their defense. I think their defense has played better. It's not great. I don't love their defense. They've given up a lot on the ground, but I think their defense, has played better than the Chargers this season. The Chargers are among the leaders in a lot of different categories. For example, they've allowed the fourth most yards per game, the fourth most passing yards per game, quarterback completion percentage against. They're inside the top 10. From a fantasy standpoint, they've allowed the sixth most fantasy points to quarterbacks, the fourth most to wide receivers, the seventh most to tight ends, yards per attempt, the third most in football as well. Some of our DVOA statistics like them from, decent from an offensive standpoint, just kind of middle of the pack. But defensively, not great. DVOA, overall total defense, they're the sixth worst in football. They are the eighth worst against the pass. So this is a defense that has struggled big time at stopping big plays. And I think they're just checked out. You got Staley 1 foot out the door, and now without Keenan Allen and going to Easton Stick. On the flip side, the Raiders, they got Max Crosby, which I like, and get some pressure and make life very difficult for Easton. But they are also inside the top 10 in quarterback completion percentage against, inside the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs, yards allowed per carry, and rushing yards allowed as well. So I'm going to give a little bit of love here. A couple props that I like. We'll start here just by showing the Austin Eckler props here tonight. So 46.5 rushing yards. His receiving yard prop is 29.5, and his rushing and receiving yard prop is 78.5. According to our projections, there's edges across the board for Austin Eckler. We have him for 51.2 rushing yards on 12 attempts. We have him for 3.9 grabs and 30 receiving yards. So we have him for 81 total rushing and receiving yards. I think he clears all three of these. I was kind of tempted to take the over on his rushing attempt prop as well, but I just can't really trust Staley. The 12.5 is appealing to me over at Caesars at minus 106. I think he should get 13 or 14 carries. I think they should lean on the ground game here in this matchup without Keenan Allen. Joshua Palmer's returning, but how much you can't trust Palmer, and you can't trust Quentin Johnston, even Gerald Everett. You can't do it in your quarterfinal matchup. Maybe you're playing some sort of shallower league where this is just a week where you need a win to get into the fantasy football playoffs. It's just really tough for any of these guys. For example, I'll read the projections that we have for these players, like 7.4 fantasy points for Palmer in a half-point setting, 3.5 grabs and 43.5 receiving yards. Quentin Johnston, 3 catches, 36.5 receiving yards at 6.3. Gerald Everett at 3.2 grabs and 31.1 receiving yards, 5.8 fantasy points for him. And Austin Eckler only at 13.6, as I mentioned earlier, the 12, 51, and 3.9 grabs and 30 receiving yards. But I think we'll see them lean on the ground game a little bit. And we did see a little bit of Easton Stick most of the game last week. And we did see 7 targets for Austin Eckler, 5 grabs and 49 receiving yards. He had 51 rushing yards on 10 carries. He scored a rushing touchdown. It was his 5th of the season. The last couple of games haven't been great, especially in terms of just usage. 10 for 64 is not too bad in terms of efficiency. That was week 11 against the Packers. So a tough spot against the Ravens in week 12, 10 for 32. And then last week, 2 weeks ago was also a really tough spot. The Patriots saw the fewest rushing yards per carry. It's like just over 3. They've been really, really good defensively this season. And it does sound like Bill Belichick is going to be gone, and it's probably time. But 14 for 18 for Eckler against the New England Patriots. But the targets have been there for him. Like, you go all the way back to week 8. I'll rattle off these numbers. 8 targets, 7, 7, 3, 6, 3 against the Pats. Again, 0 points, good defense. And then 7 last week for 5 catches and 49 receiving yards. So these are the receiving yard numbers here. I'm going to jump on the over 29.5 receiving yards. I think we're going to get that one. It is a number that he's cleared in 3 of his last 5 games, despite some of the usage and maybe not even being 100% here. But I also like all of these. I think that the safest is probably the 78.5 rushing and receiving, just in case he can't get anything going on the ground. Maybe it's just another 10 carries and he gets 35, 40 rushing yards, but he gets another 40 some odd through the air, and that would get us to this number. We could see a little bit of Isaiah Spiller. And you know what? If you're the Chargers, maybe you give a little bit of run to Isaiah Spiller or Joshua Kelly in this game. You're done. Staley, what is he coaching for? Um, I would give to Eckler if I felt comfortable with my job. Maybe I'd give a little bit more to Spiller and see what you got in him and moving forward. And I know Eckler hasn't been 100%, and there was a lot of contract talk at the start of the season. Wouldn't be shocked if he was another guy that was maybe shut down here towards the end of the season. I say another guy because I just have this weird feeling about Jacobs being shut down and maybe Keenan Allen too. Like, tough go there. But I like the over 78.5 rush and receiving. I'm going to jump in on the over 29.5 receiving yards. And I have a bit of a small sprinkle here on the plus money play, plus 110. I believe that's over at Bet 365 for 5 catches here tonight for Austin Eckler. On the other side is Davante Adams. I don't want to dive into these other props tonight. Even unders, it's not really my jam. But Davante Adams here at 68.5 receiving yards. I mentioned earlier the matchup is really good for him, and I think this Chargers team is checked out. I think Staley's lost the locker room. The 4th most yards overall, the 4th most passing yards overall, the 4th most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. It does sound like Davante Adams is going to play. I would like to see Jimmy G for Adams' sake in the game, but it does sound like Aiden O'Connell is going to suit up here. A lot of targets for Davante Adams, 10 last week, 7 grabs, only 53 receiving yards. But the week before that against the Chiefs, he had 7 targets, 5 grabs, and 73 receiving yards. Against Miami, 13, 7, and 82 receiving yards. And against the Jets, which we know is a really, really tough defense, he hauled in 6 of the 13 balls that were thrown his way for 86 receiving yards. So he has topped this number in 304, and 2 of the 3 were really tough matchups. And this one here is one of the better ones. He did play the Chargers in week 4. A lot has changed since week 4, but he'd have 75 receiving yards in that matchup, 8 catches on 13 targets. There's not really a whole lot else that I like in this game. I think we'll see the under. I like the Raiders. I kind of like some field goal props if you're looking for a little bit more and you just like to have some fun little parlays on a Thursday. Maybe consider both kickers here. Dicker the kicker for over 1.5 field goals, and maybe Daniel Carlson. I would lean with Carlson as the better play. I feel a little bit more confident in the Raiders moving the ball than the Chargers. Daniel Carlson. Oh, and this is what it's come to, guys. I know. Hang with me. It's Thursday, December 14th. We're teeing up the Chargers and the Raiders. Aiden O'Connell, Easton Stick. No Jacobs. No Keenan Allen. We're talking kicker props here. But minus 133 for Daniel Carlson over at Caesars. I think he's probably good for a couple field goals in this game. There was one player I was looking at, was Gerald Everett. You know, sometimes you see some of these inexperienced quarterbacks maybe lean on their tight ends. I don't think we'll see a lot of passing attempts from Easton Stick. We have him for 31 pass attempts and 18 completions. Where are these completions going to go outside of Eckler? We get a couple maybe from Palmer. Is he limited in this game tonight? Quentin Johnston, maybe he gets a little bit more run here down the stretch of the season, which is something that I think Chargers fans should be excited to see what he can bring to the table. The past couple of weeks have been a little bit better for him overall. But Gerald Everett, 28.5 receiving yards. His catch prop is 3.5 at plus 118. That is a little steep for my liking. The 4 grabs is certainly possible. But again, Easton Stick played most of last week, and Gerald Everett had 8 targets, 5 grabs, and 39 receiving yards. He does have at least 4 catches in 3 straight games. But of course, the drop off at the quarterback position is significant. He doesn't have an injury tag next to the name. He's been practicing in full, which is good to see, and is more than you could say for a lot of players that are inside this game. So the over 28.5, I don't have the banner for it. I'm into it. I kind of dig it. Parham Day, I don't mind that either. As like an anytime touchdown, I could see that. At his prop, his catch prop is super low here, 1.5 at plus 140 for Parham. We're not seeing anything when it comes to receiving yards for Mr. Donald. He's also questionable, but it does sound like he's going to suit up. I get it. Maybe it's a Parham day. Maybe he scores a touchdown, but I just don't think that this Chargers team is going to score too many points here tonight. So maybe we see a touchdown. If it was Herbert, like if Herbert was under center, that's one that I'd be like, yeah, give me a Parham touchdown tonight. I wasn't really even looking at touchdown props. I just don't. I don't know. I want to try to give some winners on this show. I don't just give picks for the sake of giving picks, but we did hit a 30-1 Morgan Geeky first goal last night. So maybe let's see if we can carry that over here tonight. Let's take a look. Let's take a look. See on the fly. DraftKings, just bring it up. Anytime touchdowns. I'm looking at the Raiders defense here. Where we got so Jacobs' favorite is not even going to play tonight. Oh yeah, I did want to talk to you guys about Zamir White. Save that thought. Okay, so what do we got? Gerald Everett plus 380. No. Hunter Renfrow had to catch a nice little run. Where's Hunter Renfrow been? Man, what a disaster for the Raiders. 7-1 Raiders. Anytime touchdown. 28-1 for a first time touchdown for the Raiders. Chargers at 28-1. I don't mind a little sprinkle on that Raiders. Maybe a Raiders touchdown here. Why not, man? They can get pressure off the quarterback. Max Crosby, as I mentioned, can get after Easton Stick. He's pretty experienced. Staley's questionable head coach, and 7-1 ain't bad. 7-1 ain't bad. 28-1 ain't bad. A little bit of a sprinkle there. I wouldn't even put the full unit on the 7-1, maybe like a 0.25 or something like that. Zamir White may be worth your time at 6-1 for first touchdown, or plus 150 for an anytime touchdown. Now, again, it's not confirmed here tonight, and I don't even see any odds for Zamir White besides the anytime touchdown, which is plus 165. I may actually have a little bit of fun with Zamir White tonight. Plus 165 for the touchdown and plus 950 for the 2 scores. I don't know. Maybe this is just a game where both teams lean on the ground game a little bit. I do think that Zamir White is a risky play in season-long formats. For example, bringing up this schedule, I have him ranked in the low 20s. Well, I guess high 20s, like closer to 30 than 20 at the running back position. I would play him over every running back in Chicago, Deontay Foreman included. I would play him over any running back in Kansas City, as long as Pacheco doesn't play, CEH and Jerick McKinnon included. I would play him. I have him over James Conner, but I don't love James Conner this week, but I do have Zamir White just a touch behind James Conner. Our projections for Zamir White, 11.2 fantasy points. We have him for 18.1 rushing attempts, which is significant. And we could see a little bit of Amir Abdullah, but he's not that between the tackles type of runner. He's more of a third down running back. Zamir White, I'd be excited to see what Zamir White can offer tonight to the Raiders, to dynasty owners and to fantasy owners. I think should be picked up in all keeper formats and dynasty formats. I don't know the status and the future of Josh Jacobs moving forward. Is this a complete rebuild? Do they trade Devontae Adams? All those things are certainly in play in the offseason for the Raiders. But 18 carries, 66 rushing yards. We have him for 9.7 receiving yards, 1.5 grabs there on 2.1. So we don't have a large sample size of Zamir White and what he can do in NFL games. Some preseason love there, but he doesn't have a game with over 4 carries. Week 2, he had 4 for 22. Week 4, 4 for 22. Week 4 against the Chargers, he did get 3 carries. 15 rushing yards. Week 7, he caught 3 passes on 3 targets for 26 receiving yards. So he is a guy that could catch a couple passes as well. I put this show a little bit later because I wanted to find some Zamir White rushing stuff, but maybe I'll tweet it out. Follow me on Twitter if you don't already at Chris Meaney. If you have the FTM betting package, you're going to get notified right away because I'm going to as soon as he's ruled out, I'm going to be interested, right? I'm going to take if there's any rushing attempt prop that's under 18, like if there's a 16 and a half, I'll probably do a little sprinkle. 18 and a half, maybe a little bit too much just because the uncertainty there. But I do think that they'll lean on the ground game here a little bit. I'll share the projections. Here's some running backs that we have after Zamir White, for example. Brian Robinson Jr. Doesn't sound like he's going to play either. If he's out, I definitely would. And it's tough because it's Thursday. You have this situation. Are you without Josh Jacobs? Are you without Isaiah Pacheco, right? But these are some of the running backs we have after Zamir White. Brian Robinson Jr., Jerick McKinnon, Aaron Jones, Devin Singletary, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Keaton Mitchell, Tajay Spears, Deontay Foreman, Antonio Gibson. Gibson would bump up ahead of White if we knew right now that there was no Brian Robinson, Kareem Hunt, and Gus Edwards. So I would play Zamir White over Gus Edwards. I agree with that. I would, as I mentioned, I'd play him over any Chicago back, any Kansas City back. I probably weighed it out if I had Robinson and I had Gibson. I probably weighed it out just to see closer to kickoff what's the case going to be there. The Rams are certainly going to be able to score some points. They're humming on offense right now, and this is the best possible matchup against Washington. So Gibson could get a few catches out of the backfield in this matchup. But Gus Edwards is like touchdown or bust, and the past couple weeks have been pretty dud games from him. So we'll keep an eye on the Zamir White stuff there, but maybe a little bit of a sprinkle on the touchdown. And we'll see about the attempts. Brett Thunderstruck, full PPR, already starting Ridley, Flex P Washington, Quentin Johnson Hyatt, or Jameson Williams. Man. Whew. Jameson, I got this feeling about Jameson this week against the Broncos. I may go, man, this is tough, dude. I may go with Quentin Johnson there. I might go with Quentin Johnson there in that spot with no Keenan Allen. Ah, man. I would say that he gets the most targets out of the four. I would project that. Hyatt and Washington and Jameson. I think the highest ceiling here is probably with Jameson Williams. We've seen a little bit of run from him. I mean, last week, it's just you. I mean, you're well aware of this. You can get a 0 from all of those guys. The rushing touchdown in week 13, the touchdown in week 11, still doesn't have a game since week 7 with more than 3 targets, hasn't had a game with more than 2 catches. I don't even think in his NFL career. He is certainly a big play waiting to happen. As for Hyatt, I know the snaps have gone up for him. And he did have the big boom game against the Patriots, but is another guy, it could easily get you a 0 here. And I don't love the spot against the Saints. They've been a pretty decent defense. Washington, I think Jake likes Washington a little bit more than I do, but in the slot, touchdowns in back-to-back games. But it's such a very, very difficult spot for Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars against Baltimore. That may be the play, though. That may be the play. I thought, for my rankings, I think I have, let's just take a quick peek. I think I have Quentin Johnson ahead of all of these guys. Yeah, I am encouraged with what I've seen over the past couple weeks. 91 receiving yards last week. Week 13, 5 for 52. Of course, Keenan is out. How much involved is Palmer tonight? That was my original gut feeling, Brett, was Quentin Johnson. That's probably where I would go. I think I would go between him and Parker Washington there. Let's share the projections. I always want to do this with you guys. Just the projections are on point, man. Ratcliffe's all over it. Let's share. Let's see what we got for Parker Washington. We have 4.9 fantasy points. We have 2.2 grabs and 27 receiving yards. What do we have for Hyatt? I would imagine Hyatt is pretty similar, maybe even lower on the targets, but maybe higher on the receiving yards, if that makes sense. It's like the big playability that he has. And for 5.7 fantasy points, 34 receiving yards, 2.5 grabs. So he's in the driver's seat so far. Quentin Johnson should be higher than both of these guys. We have Quentin Johnston for 3.1 catches, 36.3 receiving yards, and 6.3 fantasy points. So He takes the cake out of the four guys. We have Jameson Williams for 23 on 1.6 grabs, 5.1 fantasy points. So yeah, I would go with Quentin Johnston. You could go with Parker if you wanted to, one of the two. But I lean Quentin there, man, and hopefully you get something solid there for you. Kyle Woods in the house. Interesting spot here. PPR super flex. You got Dallas Goedert, Likely, and McBride. You have three tight ends there. Opponents have Lamar and Hurts. All three tight ends could play a tight end flex, super flex, but I have Tila and Flacco that could pair with Allen for quarterback 2. And the Bears defense has been really good lately too. Arguably the best in football over the last 6 or 7 weeks, man. They really have been that good. Create some turnovers. They've stopped the run. I don't know if I play 3 tight ends here though. Your opponent has Lamar and Hurts. So what are you thinking? Like you want to, if you get Likely, I would play Likely. And even though it's Baltimore, I still think I would play Trevor Lawrence. I have him as a sit. We'll get into it in a little bit, but I still think I would take the quarterback over the tight ends, right? So you have Goddard, Likely, McBride. Your opponent has Lamar and Hurts. They got 2 top 3 quarterbacks there. All tight ends could play. You could go with those 3 tight ends, but you have T-Law and Flacco that could pair with Allen for your second quarterback. Yeah, I think right now I'm into the Likely and McBride and T-Law. That's kind of where I'm at. Flacco's been playing really good football, but the Bears are getting after the quarterback. Ever since they acquired Sweat, they're getting after the quarterback. They get like number 1 stuff rate. They're stopping the ground game. Flacco is not mobile at all to get out of the pressure that I think is going to be in his face. The Browns have a ton of injuries at the moment defensively. They're missing like their safety. I think their strong safety is some dudes on the line. So I think I would play T-Law in that scenario. And when we get into the start and sits, I mean, there's going to be some guys on here that you probably have on your roster, but you got to play them, right? I mean, certain situations you got to play. Other flex options are Pickens and Downs, and I just don't think you can go that route with Trubisky and Downs. Has been very, very quiet, very, very quiet. Yeah, I get it in the slot. I understand, but I haven't really liked what I've seen the last couple of weeks. It's been a lot of Michael Pittman, and we saw a lot of targets for, Zach Moss, and Alec Pierce had a couple decent games. So the thing with Spears is I like Spears actually more than the other 2 guys. We were all over Spears on Monday Night Football here on this show. You know, we had the 25 receiving yards. We laddered up to 50 at 14-1. It was a game where I expected them to play from behind. And in, I think, like 5 of the last 7 losses, he's had 4+ grabs. But in games where they're up, they're in contention, it's 1-score games, they're leading, you know that it's Derrick Henry. So I don't know if we'll see a ton of Tajay Spears. Man, he's a really good player, but I just don't think we'll see a lot there. Yeah, I mean, you hedge the QBs. I get it. I think you could do something like that with Likely. I'm not totally there with Goddard. I think the Eagles are going to turn to the ground game. I think that McBride, yeah, the Niners are good versus tight ends, but not great versus wide receivers. McBride is mostly wide receiver. Yes. I have him as a start basically on all the volume that he's had over the past couple of weeks, and in McBride, I got him as a top 7 tight end. I think Ratcliffe has him. I think our projections have him as a top 5 tight end. Like you can't ignore all the volume. I don't love Kyler and I don't like James Conner in this spot, but they are 14-point dogs. Arizona, you're gonna have to throw the football here a little bit. And for I mean, I had it down here. I'm sure you guys you're well aware of this. Have him on your roster. You can just look at the game log for him. But 7+ targets in 4 straight games. 9 in 3 of those games. I faced Baltimore at the time. The Ravens were the best team in football against the tight end position. He had 14 targets, 10 grabs, 95 yards, and a touchdown in that game. And as I mentioned, just the 14-point dogs here. So I would play T-Law, even though it's Baltimore. We just saw Stafford have a really good game against the Ravens. You know, he had almost 400 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns. So it's possible Trevor Lawrence could have toss a couple touchdowns there. Evan Ingram is trending up. I just want to share the tight end projections with you, and just I'm pretty sure Ratcliffe has. Oh, he's Goddard ahead of Likely. Wow, he has McBride at tight end 3. Whew. He has Kelsey, Kittle, McBride, Laporta, Ingram, Hawkinson, Ferguson, and Njoku, Kincaid, Goddard, likely. Mine are a touch different than that. I don't have McBride as high. I have Laporta ahead of McBride. I have Evan Ingram ahead of McBride, and I have Ferguson ahead of McBride. But McBride is a top 7, as I mentioned. And I like likely more than I like Dallas Goddard. But again, we're splitting hairs there. The projections are separated by 0.4. So I play T-Law, I'd play McBride, and I'd play likely. But I totally get if you want to go Goddard. We haven't really seen any Hurts to Goddard touchdowns this year. If they get near the inside the 10, it's probably going to be, some ground game stuff there. Yeah, no problem. Hopefully it works out for you. Yeah, T-Law did well against Baltimore this time last year. He really did. I do have him as a sit, so kind of bear with me here. But again, it's all about context. It's all about options and things that you have or that you may not have at this point of the season. So week 15, these are some players that I like a little bit more than consensus and some players that I think are in really good spots. Ultimately, players that I would start in week 15. We'll start here with Matthew Stafford. Last week, I was off Stafford, but he really impressed me against the Ravens. As I mentioned, this is a team that allowed fewer than 5 yards per attempt. Is a very, very stout defense. Matthew Stafford, all he did was throw for 394 yards and 3 touchdowns. He got 10 touchdowns in his last 3 games. He faced the Browns a couple weeks ago, a really nice defense, number 1 in DVOA defense. He had 279 passing yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. Now he gets the best possible matchup a quarterback could get. Heading into week 15, Washington, a league high 380 yards allowed, 266 passing yards allowed, 8.1 yards per attempt, and 30 points per game. All of those numbers, the worst in football. They've allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks, the second most fantasy points to wide receivers, top 10 in fantasy points to running backs. They are dead last in DVOA defense and 32nd in pass DVOA as well, according to FTNBets.com. We saw a vintage Cooper Cup game last week. We know he got Puka Nacua, and Kyron Williams has got like over 60 attempts over the past couple weeks. He's been a baller on the ground and through the air. Matthew Stafford could just be a league winner for you down the stretch of the season. If you are in need of a dart throw play at the quarterback position, I have Jake Browning as a top 15 quarterback again this week. I think he's a strong super flex quarterback. I would actually play him over Trevor Lawrence and over Kyler Murray, and I would consider him over Jared Goff as well. It's a small sample size, but he has a 75% completion rate, 9.1 yards per attempt, 5 passing touchdowns, his 2 picks against him so far, or just 2 interceptions. He's got 2 rushing touchdowns. He's using his legs to pick up a couple extra yards on the ground. And the Vikings have the second highest quarterback completion percentage against. Jamar Chase is making some plays. T. Higgins has made some plays last week. Joe Mixon is catching balls out of the backfield. Really like what I've seen from Jake Browning. I'm pretty impressed, actually. And I have him as a top 15 quarterback. Russell Wilson, we talked about him last week. 4th most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. The Detroit Lions, my goodness, top 10 to wide receivers. Sutton has 10 touchdowns on the season, continues to score touchdowns. Russell Wilson hasn't had too many ceiling games, but he has 15 plus fantasy points in 6 straight games. As I mentioned earlier, since week 7, the Broncos are 6-1, 24 rushing yards per game, the most he's had since 2020, and like the second most he's had over the last 5 or 6 years. He's running the football, calling his own number. If Jerry Jeudy can catch a pass for him, last week, Jerry Jeudy should have had 2 touchdowns. Rush should have had a massive game. It's not hitting the ceiling because Judy's not doing anything for him. But I think this could be a really fun game. Detroit is struggling right now defensively. So do we like Russell Wilson as a quarterback play this week? I'm not going to spend too much time on Rachaad White. This is an obvious play, but I like him in DFS. I'm going to like his props this week, so I wanted to bring him to your guys' attention. The Packers allowed the second most fantasy points, or the second most rushing yards to running backs, and top 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs as well. The 6th most yards per carry. Rachaad White, man, let's go. We talked about Rachaad White as one of our favorite targets on the show. We got a lot of shares of Rachaad White, 6 touchdowns in his last 6 games, got 2 100-yard games over the last 3. We talked about him as a buy low candidate at the start of the season. He had so many difficult matchups for running backs. The schedule has opened up for him significantly. 50 catches last year as a rookie. He's going to top that. He's got 48 grabs. He's currently RB5 and a half-point setting on the season, so we know that we're starting him. What are we doing starting DeAndre Swift? DeAndre Swift, RB19 on the season, certainly return value. But he is he's probably been a pain in your butt over the past couple weeks. Hopefully, he didn't do enough damage, or it's possible he did enough damage where he didn't get you into the playoffs. But hopefully, you made it there. The last two games, 17 carries, under 50 rushing yards, just two catches, 0 last week. I think Philly gets back to the run game. I think they lean on their offensive line. I think they run the football here. Seattle top 10 in rushing yards allowed, fifth in fantasy points allowed to running backs, top 10 in yards allowed per carry, and fourth in rushing touchdowns. I think the Eagles should lean on their ground game. That's just me talking. I can't say with confidence that they will. Seeing DeAndre Swift last week in the second half have 3 carries was really, really puzzling to me because they were just down a couple scores. And in the second half of games against Kansas City and Buffalo, it was Swift that got them going. So let's get back to basics here, Philadelphia. This is a matchup where you can throw on Seattle, but you can also run, lean on the offensive line. I would start DeAndre Swift this week, but I have him as a low-end RB2. I have Ezekiel Elliott ahead of him. Was really impressed with what I saw from Zeke as another guy. We had the over on his rushing attempts, his receiving yards, and his receptions. And last week he had 22 carries. Wasn't super efficient with those carries, but he had 68 rushing yards. He had 8 targets, 7 grabs. With the first game that he's played in New England without Ramondre Stevenson, 30 attempts is really hard to ignore. 7 grabs, the 72 receiving yards. Kansas City inside the top 10 in yards allowed per carry. It's a really good defense, but we know they're going to lean on the ground game here with Ezekiel Elliott. Should they get inside the red zone, they're going to hand it off to him. He's going to get all of the touches. And same with Zach Moss. The past couple of weeks have been very, very disappointing. I know a lot of people have had him as a top 12 running back. I have him as a low-end RB2 here, but it's the volume and the opportunity that I just cannot ignore for Zach Moss. 6 and 7 fantasy points over the last 2 games without Jonathan Taylor, but 32 carries in those 2 games, 11 targets over that span, just 6 grabs, but 8 targets last week as well. This isn't an awful spot against the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you're looking for a dart throw, a flex play here, I like Keaton Mitchell against the Jags, and I do like him more than Gus Edwards. 8+ carries in 4 of his last 5 games, 50+ yards in back-to-back games, got 2 games with 25+ receiving yards. Not a ton of work, not a ton of goal line work, but 8.5 yards per attempt is significant, and 13.6 yards per catch also significant. So he's probably still going to live in the 8 to 10 touch range, but he's doing enough to kind of be worthy of a flex play here for you. And I would play him again over the Chicago backs and over Gus Edwards and over both Houston backs as well. Jaden Reed, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. We know that we're starting this guy, but just wanted to give him a little bit of love. Season high, 10 targets, 8 grabs last week. He only had 27 receiving yards, but he did have 38 rushing yards on 4 carries. Got 2 rushing touchdowns over the last 4 weeks, 3 total. He has led the Packers in touches over the past couple weeks as well. Christian Watson is not 100%. Romeo Doubs not 100%. Tampa Bay has allowed the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers, the 5th most yards per attempt, and the 3rd most passing yards as well. So we could see Jordan Love hook up with Jaden Reed, maybe Doubs in the end zone as well. As you see, I do have Trey McBride on this board against the Niners. 7+ targets in 4 straight games, 9+ in 3 of them. A tough matchup against the Ravens earlier in the year. At the time, Baltimore had allowed the fewest fantasy points to tight ends, and he had 10 catches on 14 targets, and he had 95 yards, and he found the end zone. Evan Ingram here against Baltimore. Again, Baltimore is good defense. Not breaking any news here. But 12 targets, 11 grabs, 95 yards, and 2 touchdowns in Evan Ingram's last game. He's got touchdowns in back-to-back games, 3 over that span. He had 0 in the first 12 weeks of the season. Season high in terms of targets, catches, and yards last week. And Christian Kirk being sidelined has a lot to do with that. So we like Evan Ingram this week as a top 10 tight end. And Isaiah Likely is in here as well. 13 targets, 9 grabs, over 120 yards in 2 games without Mark Andrews. Scored a touchdown last week. It was busted coverage, but he still scored. He is a mismatch on the field. And the Jags have allowed over 60 points in their last 2 football games, and they faced Jake Browning and Joe Flacco. And now they got to face Lamar Jackson, who's coming off like a 300-yard game and 3 touchdowns. So, again, not breaking any news with those guys, but I like all 3 of them more than Dallas Goedert if you had the decision to make. Just want to jump on over if there's any other questions here. Flacco signed a 1-year deal. Good for him. Yeah, there is some talk that the Jets could kind of pry him away potentially. Hello, Albert in the house. Welcome in. Anonymous here, 14 team PPR, half point PPR, need 2. Downs, Myers, Watson. Devontae is your wide receiver 2. Thoughts on Adams Myers stack? Yeah. I'm I don't know, dude. Don't love it, but yeah, I mean, I don't think you can start Watson. I don't even think he's going to play. I'm not really feeling Downs. I do like Myers the most out of those wide receivers you mentioned. Brian Robinson Jr. is kind of trending in the wrong direction as well. It's really tough to have this kind of stack, a Raiders stack that is at a 34-point total, but it is the Chargers defense. Really, I would say yes if it was Jimmy G. I kind of feel like maybe Foreman against Cleveland is where I would lean in that spot, but it's either I don't know. I don't like to put all my eggs in one basket unless it's like a top tier offensive squad. What I will say about Foreman, even though I'm not crazy about any Chicago running back, it was just really nice to see him. I suppose if you're a Foreman owner, I really wanted to see Rashawn Johnson get some love, but he took over the backfield 11 carries, 50 rushing yards. He caught 2 passes for 22 receiving yards as well. So I think he's a touch safer. I think he's the goal line back. There were a few designed runs. There was 9, I think, for Justin Fields the last week, which does kind of limit what he could do and his upside potentially. But Rashawn Johnson didn't touch the field till the end, and Khalil Herbert didn't really touch the field. It's just 5 grabs, 25 yards last week for Jacoby Myers. He's been held under 7 fantasy points in 1, 2, 3, 4 of his last 6. He's good with Jimmy G. I think I would play Foreman, dude. I think I really would. I think I would go with Foreman. Oh, you need to flex too. Okay, so yeah, Myers and Foreman. I'm all right with that. If Brian Robinson was going to play, I would say yes, but I don't think we're going to hear anything until tomorrow, and it does sound like he's going to be out. Did not practice again, so it's not looking great for Brian Robinson Jr. Charbonnet against the Eagles. I don't like it, and I'm not really feeling Downs at the moment. So yeah, I think your options are Myers and Foreman. Good luck, dude. It could work out for you, right? It's a good spot. The Chargers are pretty awful. The secondary is pretty brutal. Start 2, sit 1. All your decision is easy for you. You're just going to go with the Miami guys. I don't think Jacobs is going to play today. Jacobs is looking doubtful, and it sounds like a Chan is looking doubtful as well. Mostert, you're starting every week. Don't even consider sitting him. He just scores a touchdown every week, right? That's it. Every week he scores. So I think he popped off against the Jets. It was Black Friday game too, right? Didn't he have a couple scores? I think we sweated out a 2 touchdown game for him in the bet tracker. He got one late. He shouldn't have even got run, but I think there was a third string running back came in, fumbled the ball, and then McDaniels put Mostert out there again. It sounds like Jacobs is going to sit, so that decision will be made a little bit easier for you. And I don't think you should play Zamir White over those 2 guys, but you may want to pick them up. Again, just kind of hammer home this thought process. Have 2 quarterbacks, have 2 tight ends, have 2 defenses, have these next man up running backs, these handcuffs, have them, because you don't want to be fighting on the waiver wire for a running back that could fall into 20 plus touches. Okay, so just pick up Zamir and play the 2 Miami guys, I guess. Seth in the house. Hey, Chris, sorry, I'm just dropping in late. All good, dude. All good. Have Russ and Jordan Love on the bench. Would you start either of them over Tua this week? I'm very nervous about the Jets matchup. Actually would. We're going to get into the sits in a little bit. I am also worried. I would play both of those quarterbacks over Tua. I know that Tua has the ceiling. I get it. Tua Tagovailoa has the ceiling. He had a season low 9 fantasy points last week. And when he played the Jets a couple weeks ago with a healthy Tyreek Hill, he also had 9 fantasy points. So I would play Russell Wilson over him, but I also have Jordan Love ranked ahead as well. I just want to go to our projections. We have Hurts as QB1, Allen 2, Lamar 3, Dak 4, Purdy 5, Mahomes 6, Stafford 7, Howell 8, Fields 9, 10 Russell Wilson, 11 Jordan Love, and then we go Kyler at 12. We have Goff at 13 and Tua at 14. Ratcliffe's got Locke in there at 15, assuming he's going to start there. I got Jake Browning a little bit ahead of some of these other guys. But yes, I would sit Tua, man. Hopefully it works out for you. And I know that the ceiling is high, but you have a right to be nervous about that. I got some other numbers I'll dive into in a little bit. I think that's the way. Downs has been very underwhelming. Hopefully Watson, B. Rob are playing. I appreciate it. All good. Yeah, I hope that I steer you in the right direction. I want to steer you in the wrong direction. All you guys are super sharp, and it's just it's kind of nice to talk it out with somebody. So I hear that. Hopefully it works out for you. Downs has been underwhelming. I just wonder how healthy he is. And yeah, hopefully one of the two. I would feel better about Brian Robinson if it was, if it's a good matchup for Watson, but unfortunately for him, he just has not been able to stay healthy, man. Rough go. I love the player. I love the talent, but it's just rough go. So here's players that I would sit in week 15. Again, it's all context depending. You may have to play some of these guys, but these guys are in tougher matchups here. We'll start with Tua. We had the Tua question. Should you play Russell Wilson or Jordan Love over Tua? And I have him ranked ahead. Those guys both ranked ahead of Tua, and their projections agree with me. Second, fewest fantasy yard, or here, this is the Jets, and it's an elite defense, and I think we all know that. For me, I think it's the best defense in football. Certainly the best secondary in football. The second fewest passing yards allowed, the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks and wide receivers, the second fewest yards per attempt allowed. They're number 3 in pass DVOA, according to FTN. Tua last week, 9 fantasy points. He had 9 week 12 against the Jets. Tyreek Hill is not 100%. The Jets have allowed three touchdowns to wide receivers all year long. Really tough spot. It's been over 400 days since Tua's beat a team with a winning record. The Jets would have a winning record if they had a capable quarterback under center. The defense is really, really good. So I am sitting Tua where I can, and there'll be another spot. Hopefully you get by and you play next week. And I think the matchup is much better for Tua in the weeks to come. But this one is one where I think you want to avoid it. Trevor Lawrence as well against Baltimore. The past couple of weeks for T-Law has been fantastic. 20 fantasy points, 25, 32. But this spot against the Ravens, a league best 5.5 yards per attempt, the second fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 5th lowest quarterback completion percentage against, bottom 10 matchup for wide receivers and for running backs. And for Kyler Murray, I get it. He's got a high ceiling, just like all these guys have high ceilings, but they do have tough matchups this week. And sometimes you have to make these calls. And I don't think it's being too cute. You hear the term player studs. I think for quarterbacks, it could be a little bit different. San Fran, number 4 in DVOA defense, number 4 against the pass. They've allowed the fewest rushing yards, the 4th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 2nd fewest to running backs. Only 11 fantasy points last week for Kyler against the Steelers. Is he going to run around a ton? Maybe he runs around. He hits McBride in the end zone, but I think the ceiling is going to be limited here. I think it's capped because the Niners are just cooking. They're rolling. And I'd be hesitant to start James Conner coming off a game where he had 25 carries, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. It's great. Maybe he helped you punch a ticket into the playoffs. Maybe you have no choice but to play this guy. And maybe he can find the end zone for you. I would assume that the attempts are there. He's probably going to get a couple targets out of the backfield, but the past couple of games against San Fran, 14 for 42 and 10 for 29. They've allowed the fewest rushing yards, the 2nd fewest fantasy points to backs, the fewest points per game, top 10 in yards allowed per carry. In terms of just allowing the fewest. So it's a really tough spot for everybody in Arizona. And I know I'm not breaking any news with that. How about Gus Edwards against Jacksonville? You may have to play this guy. He's gotten 10 touchdowns on the season. It's been very boom or bust, kind of like a touchdown or nothing from him. He has not really been involved through the air this season. 14 carries for 41 yards over the last 2 games, only got 5 fantasy points. Keaton Mitchell's trending up. I just don't think you can play him and just say, oh, I hope he scores a touchdown. And that's really just it. If you play him as a flex play, you just hope that he finds the end zone. Because he is still getting some goal line work there. All the Houston running backs against Tennessee, Devin Singletary and Damian Pierce. Last week it was Singletary. The week before it was Pierce. Potentially without CJ Stroud, Nico Collins. We know Tank Della's sideline here. The Titans are going to stack boxes against Tennessee, especially if it's Davis Mills there under center. So I would try to find another option if you could. Jordan Addison hasn't topped double-digit fantasy points since week 8. Jefferson is going to play in this game on Saturday. They're turning to Nick Mullins, 3 targets last week. Just a rough go for Jordan Addison over the past couple weeks. And same with Adam Thielen. You get a boost in PPR formats, but he has 10 or fewer fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 games. Atlanta, the 4th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. They've only allowed 3 wideouts to have 100 yards against them this season. Amon-Ra St. Brown earlier in the year, Chris Olave recently, and DeAndre Hopkins. Adam Thielen is slowed down. The offensive line of Carolina is not great. They have one of the lowest team implied totals. Bryce Young, he's really struggled as a rookie. It's way too early to write off his career, but he struggled as a rookie. The play calling is not great, and Thielen is really slowed down over the past few weeks. And then a couple tight ends here. Again, you may have to play some of these guys. The other tight ends that I mentioned earlier, I think are in better spots. But Cole Kmet against the Browns, this is an extremely difficult spot for Justin Fields. I would play Justin Fields. I have him as a top 12 quarterback, the rushing floor that he brings to the table, the connection that he's had with DJ Moore this season. Cleveland's defense hasn't been as great lately, but they're still number one in DVOA defense. They're number one against the pass. They've allowed the fewest yards, the fewest passing yards, the second fewest fantasy points to tight ends, and a 56% completion rate to opposing quarterbacks. This is a very difficult environment to play in Cleveland. And for Justin Fields, it's a huge test. I like the defense in Chicago to keep them in this game, but I would sit Cole Kmet if you could afford to. I think it's easier to sit Pat Freiermuth against Indianapolis, especially with Mitch Trubisky under center. He had a great game with Pickett a couple weeks ago, just 3 catches on 7 targets last week. He only had 18 receiving yards. And Hunter Henry had 2 scores last week. Another guy that's very touchdown or bust, like a lot of tight ends across the league. He does have 5 scores on the week, but he's been held to 5 or fewer fantasy points in 8 of his last 10 games. And this matchup against the Chiefs is much more difficult for Billy Zappi, who did some good things, against the Steelers. He also did some pretty bad things as well. Pretty inaccurate, some poor decision-making there for him. But Hunter Henry, Billy Zappi, I think these guys are going to be in a tough spot. Tough place against Kansas City. They're ticked off, man. The Chiefs are pissed. And I think that they get right this week. And I don't think they're going to score a lot of points. New England's defense has been elite, but I think for Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, let's lean on the ground game here just a touch with Zeke. Speaking of Myers, wait on Nico, Noah's status, or just play Jacoby tonight. I would wait. I know it's really tough, and this is the time of the year where it really does get difficult because of the Saturday games, right? So we got 4 games before Sunday. Got to make some of these decisions. We hope that we hear some good news and some of these guys tomorrow. But I think it's worth waiting. You know what? Even if it's Mills under center, I think out of all the backup quarterbacks that we've seen this year, I think he's probably going to be one of the better ones. Like, I get drafting CJ Stroud, but I thought Mills, the 16 to 10 touchdown interception ratio in year 1, the 67% completion rate was solid. He definitely took a step back in year 2, even though he threw for more yards and he had more passing touchdowns, but he did throw more picks and he did play more football, which was kind of part of it. But I would wait, man. Nico Collins, he got shut out against the Jets. It just happens. And he had the injury. But if he doesn't play, and you have both, I assume, which is great, smart football there, JP. You got to have these guys handcuffed and have these have these stashes. You look at Noah Brown, and he didn't play week 11, week 12, 7 targets over the last 2 weeks and does nothing. Broncos, again, have turned it around defensively, and the Jets are just legit. He was limited in practice on Wednesday, which is a good sign. You go back to week 9 and week 10, Tank Dell and Nico Collins, one of the two missed. I think it was Nico missed one of those games and maybe Tank was limited, but those back-to-back games, and it was with Stroud, was phenomenal. He had 13 grabs. He had over 300 receiving yards. He had a touchdown. Somebody's got to catch the ball here for the Texans. And if it's no Nico, then Noah's really the only guy there. Dalton Schultz is back, which I do like him. But if Nico plays, great. You roll him out. And if there's no Nico, then I think that Noah would have a better game than Jacoby. That's where I'm at. I think I would lean with Noah over Jacoby there. Anything else, guys, before we get out of here? Again, tomorrow we'll be back. We'll have more news when it comes to practice reports. Friday's a big day, huge day. We can go over some more starting to sit stuff. We'll have some picks against the spread for the weekend. We'll have some props. We'll have some touchdown calls for you guys as well. And I'm hoping that you don't have to play too many guys in this game tonight. I know there's some Jacoby Myers owners out there. Hopefully he comes through for some of you guys here tonight. But we'll have some more. We'll be able to dive deeper a little bit into some of these practice reports. And I think the biggest, some of the things that I'm personally waiting on in Houston, right? I'm really looking at the Texans, and can CJ Stroud find a way to play in this game? And if he does, what kind of weapons are there? And if it is Davis Mills, who's he throwing the football to? Is Noah Brown has been dropped in a lot of leagues lately. I think he's a pretty good pickup, a sneaky little stash there. So I see some people that are jumping in. I don't have a lot of picks and props for tonight. I like the Raiders and the under to win the game here tonight. I am in on us and Eckler. These are the props that are available. I think that there's edges in all of these. My favorite is the over 78.5 rushing and receiving, and then the 29.5 receiving yards. Here I like the over 4.5 grabs at plus money. And I am going to Devontae Adams. It sounds like he's going to play at over 68.5 receiving yards against the secondary here. And just nothing confirmed yet when it comes to Josh Jacobs. It sounds like he's going to be out. And I mentioned earlier for Zamir White, we have him for 18 carries and roughly 60 rushing yards. Just nothing yet in the prop world. But follow me on Twitter at Chris Meaney. Check out ftmbets.com. We'll probably have something in there. I like the plus 165 for a touchdown and maybe a sprinkle on the plus 950 for 2 touchdowns. And I think the Raiders at 7-1 or 28-1 for first touchdown. I think they're in play. But I would say they lean on Eckler a little bit here in this game. We saw Easton Stick lean on him a touch in the receiving game as well. So that's why I'm in on that prop. Gonna get out of here, guys. Good luck tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully everybody's getting W's. Check out ftmbets.com for all the picks. I got some NHL picks and some props for free over at ftmbets.com as well. We'll talk to you guys soon. Cheers.